Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to Versus Stars podcast. All my loyal listeners, thank you for the continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. This is an amazing episode because Ben Emanuel boards the mothership. He is producer of Have Hopio. Come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Emanuel. Thank you so much for coming to Versus Stars podcast.
My pleasure, Jeff. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. So I always start off with the question of inspiration. So what inspired your love of acting and who your earliest influences?
What inspired my love of acting is probably survival, emotional survival. We all deal with the cards we've been dealt. And I think as a kid, I was pretty shy and I grew up in a little bit of a chaotic environment, loving but chaotic home. And I found that kind of performing for people or getting people to laugh or, just getting people to sort of focus on me kind of made things better sometimes. So I guess it started that way. My first significant acting role was probably Baby Bear in Goldilocks and the Three Bears in the first grade. And my recollection of that is that we were doing this show and I was wearing this old fur coat that belonged to my grandmother, I think, this old kind of ratty fur coat. And there was the part where I was supposed to drink the porridge or eat the porridge. And we were doing the show in front of 100 kids or so and parents and stuff. And I remember eating the porridge and then just getting this idea that it would be really funny if I threw up after I ate the porridge and kind of spit it out and gagged on it. So, I'm like 6 years old, 7 years old. And so I taste the porridge, barf, pretend to barf. Kids go nuts, huge laugh. And so I thought, this is good. This feels good. After the show, the teacher, Mrs. Hooper, took me aside and said, don't ever do that again. That was very rude. So we did our second show the next day. And of course, I did it again because you got to get the laugh, right? If the
Yeah.
laugh is there, you got to get it. So that was kind of like a real buzz to get that laugh. And I guess that's kind of what got me going. I suppose your second question was who inspires me or what inspires me?
Your earliest influences of as far as acting style.
Uh, I remember seeing The Wizard of Oz as a real little kid and being terrified and mesmerized by the Wicked Witch and those monkeys. That really had a hold on me. I remember seeing other films as I got older, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I remember going to that as a kid, and then the movie finished, and I said to my parents, I want to see it again right now. I just love something about that film, about those two characters. They just seemed like real guys to me, like I was used to kind of cowboy movies. They were sort of these mythological figures, but those were real guys. I thought, they seemed like real guys I could sit down and talk to. And then films like there was a film called American Graffiti, George Lucas's film, before Star Wars and all that. And again, those seemed like real people to me. And it seemed like a world that I could see myself in. So those were the kind of things that drew me in. There was lots of films along the way as I started, maturing a little bit and looking for different things in films. But I like the stuff that feels real. That's definitely my jam.
Well, you're also the founder, director, and instructor of what's called the Haven Acting Studio in Vancouver.
Yes.
So, what is the acting style that's the focus of the school? Because I know there's usually to the Meisner. I can't remember the name of the other one. So, so what is like the focus of your school?
Well, the focus of Haven Acting Studio is really finding the suitable, effective techniques for each individual actor. Right? It's like if you look at like a sports background, before I was an actor, long before I was a boxer, as a competitive boxer as a kid and as a teenager, you got to work with what you have. Like for me, being a short, stocky guy, the same things aren't going to work for like a tall guy with long arms, and long legs. You have to kind of figure out, so what does this actor bring to the table and how can we effectively work with them? And I and the teachers who work with me at my studio, we've been lucky. And for myself, I've studied with three of arguably the top living acting teachers, these, who are still with us these days, Ivana Chubbuck out of Los Angeles and Larry Moss out of New York, and the great Patsy Rodenberg, originally out of London. They all, work in different places in the world. I studied with all of them and learned great effective tools that work for different people. My sort of philosophy is it's about communicating the story first
Mm,
and foremost. Maybe some of the older approaches to acting, the modern American approach, is about emotional truth and about having a genuine experience for the actor. And of course, emotional truth is really important, but I think that communicating the story is number one.
mm,
There's an audience there. If they're watching at home or if they're in the theater with you, you got to get the story across. And if I want to see a genuine emotional experience solely, you can watch a good documentary, or you can people watch, or you can go to the zoo and just watch animals behave authentically. And that's really, entertaining and enriching. But,
mm,
like Shakespeare said, the play is the thing.
mm.
Communicate that story and do it as truthfully as you can. Living truthfully in imaginary circumstances is one of the great ways to describe acting. But story
So,
first.
so when you think about, you said there's different methods of acting, and you instruct different ones for different people.
Yeah.
How, why do you think certain techniques work better for certain people but not others? And why is there not like a universal technique that works for everybody?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I think it's just, again, like you'd find that in sports. You'd find that in, business. Like you're going to take 10 great chefs and they're all going to chop that onion differently,
Mm,
depending on what school they went to. There's going to be different techniques, the American techniques or the European techniques or the Asian techniques, whatever. And eventually, through their own experience, they're going to find what works for them and they're going to modify it, right? So people need a combination of some guidelines, some sort of totems to, base what
mm,
they're going on. But people need freedom and people need time. So, for example, there's something in acting that people call substitution, personalization,
yeah.
which is like some people would call that the method. Although the whole idea of what the method is different things to different people.
Mm,
But bringing your personal life, bringing the truth of who you are to your work, we'll call that substitution. So for some people, that's incredibly effective and really motivating and exciting and fun. And for other people, it just puts them in their head or it sort of upsets them and the things that they're dealing with in their personal life throw them off. And
mm,
maybe those people are best focused. If you have a good script, it's all in the script. You use your imagination, right? You build on things based on the story. Of course, ultimately, it's impossible not to bring your personal experience to what you do, even if you try. It's
mm,
in there, right? So, the sort of the debate between imagination versus personalization is 50 years old, 60 years old, maybe actually more than that. I'd say getting close to a 100-year-old debate now about those two techniques.
mm,
Um, I like to meet people where they are, and just try to take enough time to give them some room and find out what they do. But the right or wrong school of acting, I can't subscribe to that. And any
mm,
teachers I've ever had who have come from that place, I've found it really off putting. I think, again, you need to give people room, treat people as individuals,
mm,
give some time to find their way and, and also what kind of material they want to do. If somebody's doing Shakespeare, they can probably bring those techniques really effectively to sort of modern science fiction stuff.
mm,
It's all about that kind of clear communication, that diction, handling complicated dialogue, working in a big ensemble with clarity, so you
mm,
never know what tools are going to be effective for people. I find it really fascinating. And the longer I do it, Jeff, the more I realize I'm not really in the acting business as much as the people business.
mm,
Working with people, putting people at ease, and helping facilitate being in an environment that facilitates a place where they feel safe and challenged and focused and can bring out their gifts in a way that it takes time. It's like, a lot of actors have potential actors or aspiring actors can be pretty impatient, but it takes time to build up that skill set for sure.
Mm. And as I said, your school's in Vancouver, which is sort of like one of the meccas now of film. You right now you have like Hollywood, Atlanta, and you got Vancouver. So was it Vancouver that is making it such a haven for filmed actors and everything else?
Well, there's the dollar, right? So US productions come to Vancouver to save money because the
Mm.
Canadian dollar is good for them. There's the beautiful, stunning geography of the city with mountains and ocean and a pretty, an increasingly impressive city.
Mm.
Our downtown core is they're stepping it up. The buildings are looking pretty cool. And,
Mm.
we don't have a lot of old sort of brick buildings in Vancouver. It's more of a city of glass, more modern architecture, some of it quite bland, but the new stuff's getting pretty cool. So you can double it for a lot of cities, right? You can make it a lot of like just any sort of major uh, urban city has shot in Vancouver at some point. People have shot Vancouver as European cities, American cities, Asian cities. Uh, it's just a good place to be. It's close to Los Angeles, so people like that. Um, I think that a lot of good restaurants, a lot of good weed. People like to come here and smoke weed in Vancouver. Bands used to like to come record in Vancouver because um, there were famous strip clubs in Vancouver that, the heavy metal bands used to come here and record and hang out at those famous clubs. So it's kind of got a reputation as a good place to hang out as well as a good place to work and save a couple of bucks. Yeah.
Because like I said, one of my favorite shows growing up was Supernatural. I know the entire show, for considering a show that's about a road show about the United States, I believe every episode is shot in Vancouver.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just
Around Vancouver for sure. Yeah.
right, and it's just amazing just how every state is somehow represented by Vancouver.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of if how many things I've shot in Vancouver that were actually supposed to be Vancouver. Not many, a few. They were certainly, Canadian productions that were proudly depicting Vancouver as what it is. There's a great playwright named Morris Panich from, I guess he's originally from Toronto, but he lived in Vancouver for a long time. And this isn't a very politically correct statement in our current, where people are more sensitive about what they say about these type of things. But Morris said, Vancouver is a beautiful woman without a thought in her head. And I must admit, I mean, if that's an apt comparison, you could say, a beautiful man without a thought in his head too. But Vancouver has a stunning natural beauty that draws people to it. But maybe we haven't quite established, not maybe, we have in Vancouver, we haven't established a strong cultural identity because people are focused on nature and people come to Vancouver to kind of get away from chaos and to live in a sort of more natural setting. And Vancouver's a place where people are kind of on their own trip, figuring things out. Not a lot of eye contact walking down the street. People are kind of doing their own thing. So as an artist, as an acting teacher and a filmmaker, you have to find it within yourself. If you're living in New York, every time you step out the door, you're going to be surrounded with humanity and you're going to be bombarded with it. It's going to be in your face, just making you deal with what it is to be human. But Vancouver, it's so easy to just slip away into the park or down to the beach and get away from people. So yeah, it's got its challenges, but it definitely has its rewards too.
So during the time of COVID, as an acting instructor, your lessons went from being in person to online lessons. So how did that impact the instruction of what you were doing now that you're no longer face to face? Well, I guess you're technically face to face, but you're no longer in person.
Well, I think you know that yourself firsthand, wouldn't you, doing your interviews on Zoom? I mean, I want to answer that question for you, but I'm curious for you. Have you ever conducted these interviews, this podcast in person, or has it always been online for you?
Always online. I'm an incredibly shy person in person.
You don't seem like it, but
oh, I do appreciate it.
Oh, it's interesting, right? How online. I just remember certain people, just seeing people's emails or how they communicated in
Mm,
email, and then you meet them in person and you go, oh, you're not so bold, or you're not so confident,
mm,
um, people, even, I don't know, I guess there's something we can hide behind on Zoom,
yep.
but there's also something really intimate about it. I mean, starting those acting classes, one of the things I remember, and I never planned on doing Zoom acting classes. I just, the thought, sometimes people would ask me to coach them on FaceTime, and I'd go, let's just have the conversation. Let's just talk. This thing is weird, and there's this separation of sort of reality and time. But
Mm,
I got used to it really quickly, and I grew. I of course enjoy it more in person, coaching, but I found what a great tool to bring people together. Lifesaver, you know, the intimacy of people sitting in their. So these are, most of the students, not all of them. I'd say my students range from 19 is the youngest for at my studio, and then the oldest is currently a guy in his 80s. So, it's a wide age group, but primarily focused, I'd say, in 20s and 30s. Uh, so these people were coming to these Zoom acting classes, popping on the screen when we were all in some sort of shell shock, or
mm,
just this place of whatever was going on in our lives was suddenly really being exacerbated by the isolation, right? And being
yeah.
stuck in our homes and away from each other. So it was intimate. It was, pretty vulnerable because you see somebody sitting in their bedroom, right? And like you have your backdrop there, so it gives you a bit more sort of privacy. But if some young actor is sitting in their bedroom and their laundry's all over the place and their closet doors hanging open, and they have their little twinkly lights on, or whatever their things are, their private
Yep.
photos, it's intimate.
Mm,
So even though we weren't in the same room together, you were actually in some way seeing more
mm,
about that person than you may if they just were bringing themselves to the room. You were actually seeing their living environment. Of course, a conversation, or especially acting, has its challenges on Zoom because we don't have genuine eye contact, do it.
mm,
Like for me, it's reflexive for me now to look to the camera when we're talking, because I'm used to doing that. So I can
yeah.
check in with you and see you. But if I'm talking to you, I'm going to look at the camera because at least it's kind of like eye contact
Mm,
a little bit. So we all adapted, and we all looked really forward to connecting, and we did a lot of text driven work on our scenes. You're not doing as much sort of physical living. You're not bringing all the behavior to things a little bit. You're not sort of blocking and moving around the environment, but it's the language. It's
mm,
getting the plays across with what we're saying, and how we use language. So Zoom didn't stop us, and in fact, it inspired a lot of us. It inspired a lot of us to work in different ways that this modern world requires. You can't stay. I'm old enough now to just be aware of my oldness and
mm,
kind of go, wow, I'm like, old enough to be these kids' father, or practically grandfather, some of them.
yeah.
Go, yeah, I can't be stuck in the past and go, this is the way we've always done it. Like, it's a changing world. One of the things I've noticed since COVID, acting classes when I was studying in my 20s were um, 5 hours usually, sometimes longer. Now the younger actors don't want that. They don't want to be in one spot for 5 hours,
Mm,
3 hours, 4 hours. That's enough for them. I mean, not all, there's some of them who are game, but really to sit still for that long and not deal with their phones and not
yeah.
sort of check in, it's tough for them, right? COVID has like really changed people's relationship with being together in a room for a long time. People need their own private space, or they at least need to stare at their devices. So, yeah, Zoom has been a great thing. Now, pitching, I'm also a writer and a creator. Pitching shows, you used to fly to LA, fly to Toronto, get a hotel, you know, pay hundreds of dollars in cabs or Ubers or Lyfts or whatever, go into a meeting. Hopefully it goes well, but you may spend all that money to go into a meeting where people have no serious intention of doing your show, but
Yeah.
they're taking the meeting. So now you can get that out of the way on Zoom. You
Mm.
know, they can get a good enough idea about the show on Zoom. And if you want to move it forward, maybe the next step is, getting into a room in person. So
Mm.
economically, there's no reason for people to go back, as it's just so much more cost effective to have meetings on Zoom, at least preliminary meetings.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. Like I said, well, back in the day, I had a teacher during COVID, so it was once again online classes, things of that nature. I will say COVID changed everything about like I don't know even how aware I was of Zoom before before COVID hit. I started figuring it all out. It I will say that a couple of years changed everything. I think for business, for individuals, for relationships, everything.
It's crazy, right? I had someone say to me recently that he says, I miss COVID. And this is a business guy I know, a pretty successful business guy. He goes, it was such a relief to not have to do shit that I don't want to do, go to meetings. And he said, the only thing we had to worry about was the end of the world. And it was just such a relief to only worry about one thing.
Right,
Even if
right.
it was the end of the world, instead of worrying about 100 things, you just worry about one thing. And, that's what inspired me to make my most recent film, Have Hope Yo. It's a small independent film made here in Vancouver with a number of those acting students who were with me in those early COVID acting classes. Actually,
Mm.
3 of the lead actors in the film were students in those classes. And so we shot the beginning of the film back in October of 2020. And then finished the film just very recently, over like just, a month or so ago, and ended up telling the story of these characters and what's going on with them at the beginning of COVID in their personal lives, how COVID, everything just kind of boiled to the surface.
Mm.
And then we pick up the last third of the film with them in 2023 to see how it's changed them, where they are in their lives now. And it's been really cool. I don't know if you know the film Boyhood, but
I've heard of it. I don't think I've seen it.
very cool film at fault. Like they did it for, God, I can't remember how many years, 10 years or something they shot. So you really see everybody getting older in real time, and this kid growing up. It's pretty amazing. We did it in 3 years, and we see how people changed. And what's remarkable is how these young actors, they just changed so much in their lives. I just saw them grow into themselves
Mm.
through things. One of the characters was inspired by a student of mine named Favor Onwuka. Favor was in class with me the day after George Floyd got killed, and she's the only
Mm.
Black actor in the class. So it's a bunch of white faces pop on screen and Favor. And everybody, because of COVID, probably, right? Everybody's looking at social media, and
Mm.
everybody's seeing that horrible video over and over again, and all the, everything that came with that. So everybody's feeling it, but when Favor shows up for class, obviously she has a completely her own experience, and
Mm.
we're all sitting there looking at each other on the screen, and it was weird, it was tough, and as the teacher, I felt like it's my job to sort of facilitate it, but as a white guy talking to a Black
Mm.
woman, what am I going to say?
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I spoke to Favor about that and said, if you want to tell your story, let's tell it together in this film. We're going to hear what you want to say
Mm.
about that time in your life, and let's craft this together and figure out what needs to be said.
Mm.
And there's another student who's non-binary, and that subject also just really became much more prevalent around COVID times. The
Mm.
whole gender thing, of people, taking on new genders or where people fit into society. And I have a student named Elliot Ramsey who was in class with me. And Elliot is just somebody, he goes by he, him, or they, them. I'll just say he, him. Um, Elliot was someone that you could actually talk to about this without getting, you could ask questions and listen, and Elliot listens, and you could have like a good conversation. Sometimes it's really funny, really enlightening about a really complicated issue. And Elliot just became somebody who I just really trusted to talk about things that are sometimes difficult to talk to. As sort of
Hmm.
the old white guy, you know, kind of people sometimes are just waiting for you to say something stupid or to say something inappropriate, you know? And at least it feels that way sometimes, and for good reason. Um, but with Elliot, if I say something stupid, he's not going to cancel me. We're going to talk. And I learned a lot. And I think everyone around Elliot learned a lot. And I think Elliot learned a lot. So we said, let's tell that story. And we ended up in our movie, Elliot's character ends up being stuck with his roommate in COVID. And Elliot is a very artistic, non-binary kind of intellectual speaker. And his roommate is kind of like a party bro, a guy who just wants to drink beer and smoke weed and,
Hmm.
you know, beat off in his bedroom, excuse my language. And they're stuck together during COVID. So like they're this modern odd couple. And that was a really fun part of the film, exploring that dynamic. And then finally, the other character was played by Natalie Farrow. And she spoke to me in one of those Zoom classes about TikTok and her social media uh, um, desires, her social media goals. And I knew nothing about TikTok, but I just thought, God, like you come to acting class and you want to be a TikTok star. Like I can't teach you how to be a TikTok star, but I can teach you some good acting fundamentals. But you know, I have judgment against social media because, you know, we know that social media does some great things, and it's also a massive waste of time for all of us, for young people, maybe especially, although not exclusively. So I come with judgment, you know, about social media. It's shallow, it's false, it's phony. People aren't getting real. People are putting forward this imaginary version of their lives, and it creates competition and low self esteem. And kids are jumping out windows because people are making comments, all this stuff. So I looked at TikTok and I looked at Natalie's TikTok and I thought, wow, she's really funny and she's really talented, and her videos are like entertaining, and she's doing something pretty cool.
Hmm.
And then I realized if TikTok was around when I was in my 20s, before I started acting, I played music, I played in a band, and of course our band would have used TikTok, you know, to get people to know about us. We spent our time, you know, walking around taping, you know, signs to telephone poles or to street lamps and handing out flyers. And it seems so primitive now. You know, sometimes if we were lucky, we got an interview on the radio. But for the most part, it was all word of mouth
Hmm.
and signs up. So why wouldn't you use TikTok if you have something you want to share with people?
Yeah.
Uh, so I can't say I changed my mind entirely, but I learned a lot. And so that's part of the film. So we took race, gender, and social media were the really interesting things to me that I learned during TikTok. And we put them into this film. And what they all have in common, these characters, they all have the same therapist. And so they're doing online therapy with her. And what's interesting about the therapist is we see that, you know, she's the one facilitating help, but, you know, no surprise, she's the most screwed up of all of them and is stuck in her home and doesn't leave for, you know, 7 months or something.
Right. Right.
Side. So yeah, there's a lot of meat on the bone for me as a creator during COVID. I didn't expect that. When a friend of mine first said you should do something about the pandemic, I wasn't interested at all. But the more I kind of saw it, it wasn't COVID. It was the way how COVID exacerbated people's lives that was interesting. I
Hmm.
don't I don't want to make a film with, you know, masks on the ground and taped off things and stay 6 feet apart. I mean, all those little details are true to COVID, but they're not that interesting.
Hmm.
It's just little, you know, impersonal details. What I find interesting is the change, and like how you said yourself, Jeff, how it's the world's just changed forever.
Yep.
So that's a story that I don't know that still, I'm not sure that people want to get into that because we
Mm.
want to believe that it never happened, or we want to believe it's not going to happen again. Um, I don't know. I think maybe science fiction type films are the ones who have explored these kind of ideas the most effectively before COVID happened, right?
Mm.
People looking at viruses changing the world and sending us off to live in different planets or different environments. So,
Yep.
yeah, there's a lot to chew on.
So the movie itself is described as a dramedy, a drama comedy. Now, was that always the intent, or as the stories were told by your actors, students, things of that nature, you found that there was either more drama or more comedy than you were originally thinking it would be in these stories?
I like that question because it kind of goes back to talking about acting, in that you can't force people successfully into a mold you want them to fit into. So some of the characters, just their personalities, the subject matter led us to more comedic circumstances.
Mm.
And some of it is pretty dramatic. Favor's story, the woman at the center of the George Floyd sort of story, not a lot of comedy in her story. It doesn't mean there's not lightness and hope.
Mm.
And, she has her joyful moments, but it's not easy to laugh at that stuff, right? Um, it's not her personality. Favor is a still waters run deep type of actor
Mm.
who you really see everything going on in her eyes. And then the character of Jamie with the odd couple, of course it's going to be funny. You put these two completely different guys in a room together and they're stuck there for months on end. The humor comes out, and the differences, the contrast between them creates a lot of comedy. And then Natalie, the social media character, it was important to me not to laugh at her.
Mm.
I didn't want to make fun of any of these characters. We can laugh with them. We can laugh because we see ourselves in them, but the intention is not to sort of put somebody up on the screen so we can laugh and say, isn't she stupid because she
Mm.
wants to be a TikTok star. It's more about, just laughing at how much we all need to connect, or how much we all need to be seen, or how full of crap we all are at times when we're trying to present ourselves in a way that's not really the truth.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where I was coming from in that regard.
So how much of the film is pure fiction? How much of it is true narratives or adapted narratives of your students?
Well, I think that it's certainly very closely inspired by their real lives and continued to be over the 3 years, but it's heightened in some cases, and in other cases, it's kind of reduced. Sometimes we've taken the circumstances and blown them up a bit. In other cases, we've held back on things that they may just not want to get into. The
Mm.
rule on the film was always they have final word. So I'm never gonna, like, I'm the writer of the project because I did all these interviews with them on Zoom mostly, and then wrote scenes based on those interviews. But they all have story consultant credits because I couldn't have written these stories without those consultations.
Mm.
And the agreement is they have final words. So I'm never going to ask them to do anything that they don't want to do. I'll have final cut once we've shot it, but they have final word. It's never like, please just say this. I know you're uncomfortable with this, but it's like, okay, you don't want to do that. We don't do that.
Mm.
They're telling their specific truth. So I don't know. I'd say for most of them, it's like 50-50, or maybe in some cases more like even 70-30, 70% true, 30% fictionalized. The woman who plays the therapist, who's a great actor named Gabrielle Miller, people in Canada and around the world will know her from a show she did for years called Corner Gas, that was really huge, popular show in Canada and then sold all over the world, a comedy. Um, she's not a therapist, she's an actor, but she did bring her own comedic neuroses to the part. Gabe is one of those special actors who can be absolutely truthful and also really funny at the same time. I compare her to Mary Tyler Moore. who you kind of have to be my age to know. You have to be in your 50s to really know Mary Tyler Moore's genius. She was, had a great show on when I was a kid. So Gabe is able to find the humor in her own bizarre, ridiculous neuroses at times. And then I actually play a version of myself. Is that's what we shot for the 2023 portion.
Mm.
I play a documentary filmmaker who has asked this therapist and some of her clients if they'll be part of a documentary about the mental health effects of lockdown. And my character thinks it's going to be a couple of weeks, like we were all told. We were told here in Canada, it's going to be a couple of weeks of lockdown, let this thing settle down, and everything should be fine. And of course, those 2 weeks turned into 3 years
Yes.
and counting, right? So this guy starts making this film and just has a lot of obstacles, running out of money because was expecting to shoot for a couple of weeks. It's raining all the time, which is something we just had to write into the film because when we shot, it rained every day when we shot the second part. So that was not convenient because, you want to show the passage of several months, but it's raining every day. So we had to kind of work that into the film. So that character, a lot of truth in that, a lot of truth in that. I have acted and directed at the same time before in my first film, a film called Moving Malcolm. And I did it in a short film that I wrote and directed and acted in called Ganji, about a boxer with pugilistic dementia, brain damage. And every time I do it, I go, I don't think I'm going to do this again because acting, directing they're both very demanding. And the kind of films I make are independent films. So there's not a lot of time to watch playback and
Yeah.
you just have to move fast, right? But necessity is, the mother of invention. You do what you got to do. And it's occurred to me that I'm the right guy to play this part. It's just part of the truth of this film. So bringing in someone else to play me didn't seem like a good move. So yeah, we got this. We kind of, when you make films like this, you kind of throw it all in the blender and you whip it up and something good is going to come out. You may have to like put it through the strainer a few times, but eventually you'll get some good stuff or some great stuff, I should say. Like the moments that are great truly are great and totally truthful and unique, and specific. Another analogy for this kind of filmmaking for me is, you ever hear how people would fish by throwing dynamite in the water?
Yes.
It's kind of like that. Like you don't have the time to sit and wait. You can't sit all day and wait to catch a fish like you can on a larger budget film. Big budget film, you can shoot a couple of pages a day.
Yeah.
Even less. On a show like this, you're shooting maybe even 10 pages a day. You're moving fast. And especially if you're moving from location to location, it's a lot. So you get to your location, you throw dynamite in the water, you blow everything up, some good stuff floats to the surface, you grab it all, throw it in the bin, and then in editing, you sort it out and find the good fish, right? It's kind of a technique that I've had to learn to do to make these low budget films. And it's something I enjoy. It's takes a lot out of you, but anything worthwhile does, right? It's even no matter how much money or time you have, filmmaking, will always have its challenges. But the unique challenges of this type of filmmaking are you got to move fast.
Well, as you mentioned, one of the leads is the therapist. Now, once again, as a therapist during a crisis, you assume she's the best equipped to handle pandemic and the aftermath. So, is the story more about individuals coping, or is it the group coping together? And how well does the therapist cope? Is that to be more difficult for her, or less difficult to be the therapist in the situation?
The story is definitely about people coping individually within their own respective lives. The characters never meet, except their common link is they have the same therapist. There certainly were discussions with cast and producers and various people we've worked with. One of the people working on this project is Richard J. Lewis, who's an executive producer and director on Westworld.
Oh.
And so Richard's, working in kind of the big time component of the industry. So his thinking is often more based on the things you can do if you have time and money.
Right.
So he'd say, like, they should meet, or these characters should overlap or intersect here. And then, you remind Richard that I wish it's a great idea. I wish we could do it, but, we don't have time and we don't have locations to do all that stuff. So it seemed like what made us able to do this project, especially when COVID was still heavy, is it was people sitting alone in their homes having these Zooms with their therapist. So they were largely interacting through Zoom. And then you'd see what they were just doing by themselves in their home. So
Mm.
get in there with a small cast and a really intimate sort of look into their lives. So yeah, individual stories. What holds them all together is the therapist. In this next part of the film, what holds them all together is the interviewer, right?
Yeah.
So they're all seeing the same therapist. They're all seeing the same interviewer. And we get to watch them alone and see what's going on in their private lives that they're not talking about with their therapist. Um, and I'm sorry, Jeff, what was the second part of that question was about, are they all together or do we see them alone? And there was a second.
Yeah, and as far as the therapist being a therapist, is that enabling her to cope better with COVID? Because I will say though, having known many therapists and psychiatrists in my time, they're often
Yeah.
capable of coping with things.
It's like it's a heavy load, right? It's like when you deal with other people's baggage all day,
Mm.
uh, it's hard. It's hard. It wears you out, and you don't kind of leave room for your own time. And a lot of therapists are screwy because they really care,
Mm.
and they take that stuff on for real, right? So that's more the story of our therapist. How is she dealing with it? She always shows up for her clients and does well, except in one section of the film, she accidentally eats a really potent pot cookie and gets way too hot. Well, you don't want to be high at all as a therapist with your clients, but she gets really high and tries to show up for her client the next day. Um, that was based on something that happened to me. Um, Sort of a grim story, but years ago, I had this girlfriend and her dad died, and we were with him at the hospital. The old guy died. He had pretty, hard death, cancer. So we go home, and he'd been sick for a long time. We kind of collapsed. We'd spent a lot of time at the hospital. And I wake up in the middle of the night and she's sleeping, and I'm a comfort eater, like I've been a comfort eater my whole life. I'm starting to sort of figure it out now where that's coming from, but it's compulsive comforting. So I wake up, I go into the kitchen, I go into the freezer, and there's these big chocolate chip cookies in there. And I know they're pot cookies, but I don't care because I want a cookie. And I justify it. And I think I'll eat the cookie, I'll go to sleep. By the time I wake up, I'll be fine. I eat a huge pot cookie that's probably enough for 4 or 5 people, go to bed. The next thing I know, I'm dreaming that her dad is screaming, but the sound of a cat is coming out of his mouth. And it's a really fucked up dream. Um, and I wake up, and sure enough, there's cats outside screaming and fighting. So that sound had gone into my dream. And I realize I'm so high right now. I'm unbearably tripping on this cookie. And I can't wake up my girlfriend and tell her because, she just lost her dad, and I can't make her try to take care of me.
Yeah.
So I just go into the living room and walk around in circles, seriously, for like 3 or 4 hours, just so high, and then go to the bathroom and just throw up for like an hour. Huge total overdose. So I put that into the film. And the therapist wakes up in the night, eats a cookie, and then because she's a comfort eater, like so many people were eating cookies during COVID, right? Baking cookies, bread, whatever. So I was able to put one of my own ridiculous, stupid experiences in there, through the therapist's experience. So I think her shortcomings are definitely a lot of things that we can all relate to. Just we weren't all on our best game during COVID, were we were.
I will agree without sharing stories. I will agree to not necessarily being at my during some COVID time.
You do what you got to do, right? You just do what you got to do to get by.
That's I think a good lesson for life, even after COVID.
Well, then it's true. Like, how do you put on pants again? You know, it's like I remember one of my agents referred to them as hard pants. She said, "Yeah, we're going to go back to the office and put on hard pants because we spent 2 years in soft pants and it was pretty great, you know, or no."
Yeah, I will say COVID my memory one of my things of COVID was because of where my where my living room is. I don't have a window.
Mm.
And I don't have, and so where I had learned valuable lessons because of it. As a teacher, during the day I was in the living room. When my day was over, because it was COVID, I was in my living room. And I started realizing I was losing track of time and day and night because I didn't have windows. My entire was the one spot. So I realized I stopped. I know my sleep was all messed up. Everything was messed up because
Yeah,
my room became the entire world to me
as
for
well.
hours and hours. Yeah. So I did realize it's you got if any that situation happens again, you got to be in different rooms. You got to
Yeah,
make sure you take an office room. This is your regular room, and try things
yeah,
on that. It was impactful.
absolutely. It's like you start living like Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys, it's just all one room.
Yeah.
You just live in the room with the piano and you kind of sleep there and you eat there and you pass out there and you clothes are just so I get it. What do you teach?
I'm well now I work at a drug and alcohol recovery school,
Oh,
but I'm the mainly the English teacher, but I'm there for all the subjects because I'm the only teacher they've got.
so you teach people who are in recovery for drugs and alcohol?
Yep.
That's cool. That must be rewarding and also really challenging because I bet people are pretty uncomfortable sitting still when they're going through withdrawal and stuff.
I will say it's rough. The ones that want to be in the program are usually fantastic. The ones that don't want to be in the program are very difficult. And it's a
Right.
question of which ones you get. And no, it's interesting. But I said I remember COVID. When it was COVID, I was teaching English at the therapy school. So these are all kids recovering, who not recovering, sorry, all kids dealing with usually anxiety, autism, other psychological behavioral issues. And yeah, it was interesting trying to teach remotely. It was once again
Oh yeah. With
hell of an experience.
autism. Autism. I mean, I have a sister who's autistic, and obviously there's so many different levels to that spectrum, but I can't imagine like trying to get her to sit still and focus. If she's looking at a computer, she's gonna watch Barney or Wizard of Oz is one of her old favorites too. But
Yeah.
getting her to just sit and listen to a teacher, no, no way. So
It,
that's
it
challenging.
it was rough. It was rough. One story I do share is like I do remember at some point I started doing my lessons on my deck
Oh, yeah.
because just for the fresh air and just for the relaxation part of that. So going back to Havhopia, so is it because according to what I saw on IMDb, it's episodes? Is it a film or is it a
It's a
series?
feature. So we started it as a web series. The original intention was like a friend of mine who would executive produce something I did before, a film called Downriver. He said, "Why don't you do something on COVID?" I said, "Oh, no, 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 no." And then things started happening in class and things got interesting. So we got together a little crew. We shot 6 10-minute episodes. It ended up being about 70 minutes of footage. And then I showed a little teaser to my friend Richard J. Lewis, who's the guy who works with Westworld and has also directed a couple of really great feature films and tons of TV. And he really liked it. And he said, "This is great. I'm in. What I want to be part of this." And he showed it to a company called Thunderbird here in Vancouver. Thunderbird's a big company, and they're an international company, but we met with their Vancouver office,
Mm,
and they said, "This is great. Let's make this into a TV show." So what you need to make a TV show isn't just a production company. You need a broadcaster or a streamer, you know?
mm,
So Thunderbird takes it out and we start doing meetings and pitching it. So what we learned the hard way is pitching a show about COVID during COVID
mm.
is about as appealing as, I don't know. insert whatever suitable analogy here, but turns out nobody wants to watch a show about COVID while COVID's happening
Right.
because they want to pretend it's not happening, or they want, and if we start moving out of COVID, maybe they go, well, we don't want to go back, right? So turns out there was this little window right at the beginning of it. There was one American show, I can't remember what it was called, but a network did manage to get a show on about COVID, people on Zoom. It wasn't very good. I say that knowing how hard it is
Mm.
and that everything is subjective. Hopefully a lot of people enjoyed it. But for me, I thought, no, feels very contrived and slapped together, because it was. So that just lasted one short season. But then after that, that's it. Nobody wanted to deal with it. People would have a little mention of it or try to kind of, do a little exposition to go, oh, remember during, but nobody really wanted to get into COVID.
Yeah.
But we pitched the show hard and we said, but we have to deal with this. And everybody said, look, we really like, when I say everybody, I mean the people we, pitched it to, the broadcasters and streamers. They said, we like your footage. You guys did great. We love these characters. We love, it's just really well put together, but we're not going to do a show about COVID. Nobody wants to see it.
Yeah.
It's politically divisive, right? There's like all these politics around masks and vaccinations, and it's just, let's not do that. I was told years ago that there was a great show, I can't remember what it's called now, about divorce, and nobody would do it. This is about 10 years ago, because they said nobody can handle that every week, right? Like divorce and a child custody battle.
Yeah.
They said, there's a great movie like Kramer versus Kramer. You see it once and you experience those 90 minutes or whatever, but you don't have to come back and watch it next week and go through that hell again, right? So, but now TV has changed a lot, so people can accept difficult things and tune in to watch high stakes, emotional train wrecks in a realistic way, but not COVID, it turns out. So there still hasn't been a show about that. There's been some films. And so now coming back to that project, we thought, instead of starting to pitch again, because we did, like I adapted the script and we pitched it as something different. But we said, let's just make this movie ourselves and tell whatever story we want to tell. And enough time has passed now that we believe audiences can look back and have a little chuckle over themselves. Again, we're not trying to be letter perfect about the little details of COVID. I just don't find that stuff as interesting as the characters' personal struggles. And we said, enough time has passed. Like, people can look at this and just kind of have a laugh at what we went through, or have empathy for what these characters are going through. And it really becomes a movie about how the world changed emotionally, socially, politically, through the eyes and ears and stories of these individuals. So that seems timeless. But the backdrop, the thing that holds it together, is COVID, right? Because what else have we, we just have never had anything to compare this to, have we? For in our lifetime, there's never been something that the whole world was involved with at the same time. It's so all-consuming that I would never try to take all that on, but I can take on these 3 or 4 characters. What are they going through? So yeah, we'll see. We shot the film. We're in post-production now, editing it and getting it all together. And then we'll go out with it. I'm sure we'll hit lots of festivals, and hopefully audiences will respond, and that'll help us make a sale and, get it out in front of way more people on a good streamer. That's our intention.
Well, I hope to help out with promoting. So, Mr. Emanuel, thank you so much for coming on my show. You've been absolutely awesome. And I want everyone to check out Have Hopio. You
betcha. It'll be a while, but we'll let you know when the releases come. My pleasure. Take it easy and all the best to you.